Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm really excited to bring you today's video. If you enjoy my content, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Let's get started. January 12, 2010 was a day that left an indelible mark on Haiti's history. That morning, the capital city of Port-au-Prince was about to experience one of the world's most devastating disasters. At 16:53 p.m., a terrifying force from the depths of the earth caused a massive tremor throughout the city. The 7.0 magnitude earthquake lasted only a few seconds, but changed thousands of lives in those moments. Port-au-Prince, while not a massive metropolis, was densely populated. Furthermore, its infrastructure and construction standards were weak. Many buildings had not been constructed according to modern building codes. As soon as the tremor began, the city began collapsing like a house of cards. Buildings collapsed on top of each other, streets filled with massive piles of rubble. The sound of steel and concrete blocks crashing echoed through the air. This tremor, arriving with the roar of thunder, left people in sheer horror. The effects of the earthquake were not limited to the capital. Surrounding towns and villages shared the same fate. However, the dense population and crowded structure of Port-au-Prince turned it into a major catastrophe. Thousands of buildings collapsed and hundreds of people were trapped under rubble, struggling to survive. Along with the earthquake, the huge clouds of dust created by the collapse of buildings seemed to cover everything. The sky was gray and darkened. At that moment, there were as many people trapped under debris as there were who lost their lives. Many had died within just a few seconds. Their homes, schools, hospitals, and shopping centers suddenly collapsed. The streets turned into a battlefield. People desperately tried to flee for survival, but everything around them had collapsed, suddenly blocking every direction. Fear, panic, and helplessness enveloped the city. Those who managed to survive were in shock. The sounds of voices, screams, and desperate calls from beneath the rubble took over the city. Many people trapped under the debris were struggling to breathe. Various rescue teams tried to move toward the sounds coming from the rubble. However, with each passing minute, the number of survivors decreased, and rescue hopes were becoming more difficult. Immediately after the earthquake, the fear experienced by the public created a gloomy atmosphere. People realized that the entire system had broken down. Power lines were down, communication was severed, and finding water and food had become nearly impossible. Hospitals in the capital had been massively destroyed, and there was no infrastructure left to treat the injured. In addition to this, people were suffering not only physically, but also psychologically. Those who had lost their loved ones were wandering the streets in desperation, searching for their lost children, spouses, and relatives. Many families had been torn apart and separated. Rescue teams were still searching for ways to find survivors beneath the rubble. However, it was extremely difficult to stay hopeful in the midst of this enormous devastation. The impact of the earthquake in Haiti was not just the destruction of buildings. The entire structure of society, lifestyle, and order had been severely shaken. Families were torn apart, and the city had turned into a ghost town. The chaos of that moment lasted only a few seconds, but it left behind years of pain and loss. Haiti's disaster on January 12, 2010, not only changed the fate of cities, but also the fate of people. With the intensity of the earthquake, buildings in Port-au-Prince collapsed, streets caved in, and the world seemed to go dark in an instant. Among the survivors of that disaster were a few people who had been trapped under the rubble and who became the epitome of miracles. These individuals had survived not only a physical but also a psychological trial. One of these people was 27-year-old Jean. Jean, like millions of other Haitians, was trying to go about her normal day in her home early that morning. That day would turn out to be the hardest day of her life. The neighborhood where her house was located was near the epicenter of the earthquake. She had no concerns in mind, but the few seconds of shaking turned everything upside down. The building's foundations began to collapse rapidly with the intense tremor. Walls crumbled, ceilings collapsed, and everything became a jumbled mess. At that moment, Jean found herself trapped beneath the floor of the room she was in. Within just a few seconds, everything around her had fallen. It was as if she had stepped into another world. Everything around her had darkened and was engulfed in silence. Her eyes were filled with dark clouds of dust, and no matter how hard she tried, she realized she couldn't move, overwhelmed with deep fear. Her entire body was pinned under the rubble, and in pain she couldn't see anyone coming to save her. At that moment, she felt completely alone in this catastrophe. Under the rubble, Jean remained completely motionless for several minutes. She began hearing voices from other people around her, screams, desperate cries, calls for help. Yet it seemed no one would reach her. The first test of survival she had to face was to get through these excruciating moments. In pain, she took a deep breath and thought about her determination to survive. Desperately, she tried to push the stones and debris around her, but with each movement, the noise and pain from the rubble only grew louder and more intense. At first, there was hope that everyone could be rescued. But as time passed and the arrival of rescue teams was delayed, Jean's struggle to survive became even more difficult. Several hours later, search and rescue teams began arriving in the area, but finding a person trapped inside a collapsed building was not an easy task. Despite the screams of people around her, rescue teams had a hard time locating them in the depths of the rubble. During this time, Jean continued her fight for survival with only a few breaths. Every time she tried to move, she felt more trapped, and with each passing minute, she felt like she was heading closer to a confrontation with death. For the first few days, she lacked food and water. Her body began to weaken, and with each passing hour, she lost more strength. The heat and darkness of her surroundings made her realize just how difficult the fight for survival truly was. However, there was something within Jean, an unwavering determination, a glimmer of hope. She wanted to live. Even in the darkness under the rubble, she found the strength to survive. She was injured, but had no intention of giving up. This was no longer just a physical battle. It had become an emotional one as well. In her mind, she constantly thought of her family and loved ones. She didn't want to say goodbye to them or lose them. Her struggle to survive was pushing both her body and mind to their limits. On one hand, she refused to give in to despair. On the other hand, she believed in the possibility of a miracle that could save her. Jean's fight for survival became a symbol of hope for those around her and for the rescue teams. With every search effort, the drive to save Jean's life intensified. Those who heard sounds from under the rubble began to hear the voices of the rescue teams as well. As hours and days passed, Jean's epic struggle to cling to life started, to reach people all around the world. And finally, on the morning of the 27th day, Jean was miraculously rescued. Search and rescue teams, having heard her voice from beneath the rubble, quickly reached her. When she was pulled out from under the debris, a weak but triumphant smile appeared on her face. Her determination to survive and her perseverance had given her the strength to be pulled out from the rubble. Jean's rescue symbolized not only a woman's fight for survival, but also the resilience, strength, and determination of the human spirit. This miracle was like a light emerging from the lives and hopes lost beneath the rubble. Jean's survival became a lesson for everyone, reminding them that one should never give up, and that there is always a glimmer of hope. Jean was trapped under the rubble, and with each passing moment, the difficulty of her survival struggle deepened. At those moments, she had no idea how much time had passed, how long she had been there, or how much longer she could endure. Her eyes were filled with dark dust, and everything around her was completely uncertain. In the collapsed building, she felt like she was imprisoned by the walls and debris surrounding her, but there was something inside her, the instinct to survive. This instinct kept her going with every breath, with every second. In the first days, Jean couldn't even figure out exactly where she was. Amidst the debris, every movement, every breath, was a part of her survival struggle. She tried to create a small space in the gaps between the debris, but the surrounding stones and rubble became more and more difficult to deal with every passing minute. At first, her body was in great pain, but there was one thought in her mind. I must survive. I must return to my family. This thought was the light of hope that gave her strength. As time passed, one of Jean's greatest challenges became finding food and water. Under the rubble, everything was completely dark. and the only sound she could hear was her own heartbeat and deep breaths. Bitterly, with every passing hour, her body began to weaken. The lack of water, which initially seemed like a minor problem, became more and more difficult to solve as each day went by. For several days, Jeanne's body struggled fiercely with dehydration. There was nothing to revive her. Her tongue and mouth were dry, and she spent every moment trying to survive. However, Jeanne's strength and determination were some of the most crucial factors in her survival. Every day she tried to find a bit of hope by hearing sounds from the debris around her. The sounds of the rescue teams, the noises, the calls for help from somewhere. These were the things that kept her alive and connected her to life. Each new sound gave her a little more hope. No matter how weak or painful she felt, hearing these sounds every day reinforced her belief that she could win this battle. As days went by, Jeanne's body was completely drained. But there was something that kept her going every time: the instinct to survive. Her mind became clearer with each passing hour, and she felt more deeply the value of each breath. Just taking a few breaths slightly increased her chances of survival. In that narrow, dark world under the rubble, every second became an effort, a struggle. Every minute reminded her of how precious survival and life were. One of Jeanne's greatest battles was mental endurance. The physical pain, hunger, and thirst were no longer as bearable as in the first days. But no matter how difficult it got, Jeanne tried not to lose hope. Her mind constantly thought of her family, friends, and loved ones. Thoughts about how survivors could support each other crossed her mind. One day they will find me. One day I'll get out of here, she would tell herself. These thoughts remained a light of hope inside her. Another challenge was the emotional pressure. Jeanne, who didn't want to be alone, had to get used to the silence around her, to hearing her inner voice amidst the destruction. Good and bad thoughts fought within her, but even in the hardest moments she somehow managed to keep herself alive. With each new day, she continued to survive with a bit more faith. Even though she felt weak, the strength inside her was always one step ahead. Her greatest miracle was that despite her body weakening with every passing day, she managed to keep her spirit alive. Gradually, every second and minute became more meaningful. The days that followed had pushed Jeanne beyond the toughest limits a human could endure. But somehow, this resilience and determination kept her alive. For 27 days, Jeanne's body had rapidly deteriorated, but her spirit continued to fight for survival. Her mind and heart were so strong that this resilience would eventually bring her a miracle. Each passing day brought her one step closer to being rescued. Jeanne's 27-day struggle became not only a demonstration of physical endurance, but also of mental and emotional strength. She knew the value of each second and was aware that every moment gave her a chance to survive. The morning of the 27th day marked the birth of a miracle for Jeanne. After a long wait, a period that felt like years, her efforts to survive would finally make sense. Her long, dark journey through the rubble was coming to an end. Slowly but steadily, Jeanne's fight for survival would finally yield the result she had been waiting for. The beginning of her rescue reminded her of how difficult everything had been, how deeply she had been lost in the darkness. However, even in those hardest moments, there had been a glimmer of hope. The search and rescue teams had begun to reach the area of the rubble where Jeanne was located. At that moment, Jeanne felt stronger with each new sound. Over and over in her mind, something repeated, "One day I'll get out of here.
One day they will find me." These words had never been clearer. She could hear the rescue team's voices, the strikes of pickaxes and shovels, and feel the dust around her shift slightly. Those moments gave her miraculous hope while also
making her forget the painful memories of the past. When the rescue teams realized Jeanne was alive, they were shocked. For 27 days, most people had not believed that a person could survive under such conditions. The narrowing space under the rubble and the harsh conditions had made Jeanne's chances of survival seem nearly impossible. However, every second, every minute, the belief inside her kept her alive. With the strike of the pickaxe, a sound rose from the gap between the walls. The sound, which seemed to have been lost just moments ago, symbolized a miracle. When the rescue team heard the sound, they looked at each other in disbelief and asked, "Is she alive?" Indeed, she was. Even in those final moments when she was face to face with death, Jean had mentally remained upright. When the rescue team found her, they noticed how weak Jean's body was. However, they also saw that her mental strength was not as weak as her physical state. Jean had been trapped under the rubble for what seemed like years, deprived of food and water, left in darkness and solitude. Yet despite all of this, she consciously lived every moment to survive and never lost hope. When the team found Jean, they were not only rescuing a person but also trying to understand the incredible resilience and survival strength she possessed. Jean's rescue became a symbol of human physical limits being surpassed. As the team carefully extracted her from the rubble, the traces of the horrific moments she had endured reminded them of the importance of holding on to life. With every step, with every movement, Jean seemed to gain strength. But the real miracle was not just her physical survival. It was how she had managed to stay mentally alive. Throughout those 27 days, Jean had been so strong that when facing the rescue team, it was still possible to see hope in her eyes. When the team started pulling Jean out from the debris, her body was still horribly weak. Years of dehydration and hunger had already drained her physical energy. But Jean found new strength with each step, with each piece of help. As the team worked to free her, it wasn't just a physical battle. It was an emotional journey. At that moment, it wasn't only Jean's survival that mattered, but also the realization of how powerful the human spirit could be. Jean realized that everything she had thought about before being rescued, the family, the friends, the past, had been a dream. All those thoughts were now becoming a reality. However, in that moment, she chose to focus not on the past, but on the future. From then on, she decided to believe in herself as much as others had believed in her. Her moment of rescue was not only the end of a woman's struggle for survival, but also a powerful example of what can be achieved with determination, faith, and willpower. For the rescue team who witnessed Jean's survival, this moment became a memory worth a lifetime. That day, Jean's rescue became a beacon of hope for all of humanity. When the rescue team safely pulled Jean out and administered first aid, there was a sense of peace in her eyes. Yes, she had survived. But more importantly, she had won the fight for life. After 27 days of struggle, Jean experienced a miracle, and not only survived but also showed the world just how powerful the determination to live can be. That moment became a symbol to the world of how much a person can endure, and how fiercely they can fight to survive. Jean's 27-day fight for survival was not only about surpassing physical limits, but also a testament to the strength of the human spirit. Many people could not even imagine how a person could survive for so long without food or water under such harsh conditions. Yet Jean was a warrior whose spirit never ran out, even when her body was exhausted. Her story became an example proving that the fight for survival is not only a battle of the body, but also of the mind and soul. From the moment she was trapped under the rubble, Jean was alone. Like many others, she had initially waited for help, but as time passed, the initial hope gradually gave way to reality. As the days passed, it seemed almost impossible for the rescue teams to reach her. Yet, even in the dark, in the grip of despair, she never gave up her inner fight. Many times in the most difficult moments, she was on the verge of giving up. Loneliness, thirst, and pain grew heavier with every passing minute. But each time, that strong voice inside her would repeat, "Don't give up. Fight to live." Jean's survival strength went beyond merely surpassing the physical limits of her body. It revealed a deep mental and emotional power. Trapped in the rubble, isolated from the world, every second became a battle for her. Her mind fought against the pain of her body, offering her reasons to keep living. With a single thought, her survival instinct kicked in. One day, they will find me. This thought was the very thing that kept Jean alive during the darkest of moments. As Jean remained trapped under the rubble, she underwent an emotional transformation. Initially panicked and helpless, she gradually discovered the strength within her. Her survival instinct became a source of power in the harshest conditions. The silence, darkness, and solitude around her slowly began to strengthen her spirit. As pain, fear, and despair fought within her, Jean's warrior spirit rose stronger each time. She wasn't just surviving physically. She was determined to win this battle emotionally and mentally as well. Many times when Jean heard voices in the distance, she clung to the hope that the rescue teams would eventually find her. But the greatest battle she faced during this time was keeping herself mentally strong. Coping with loneliness, facing her fear, and coming to terms with her weakening body made every moment a test of endurance. Jean managed to keep herself standing by treating each moment as if it were a fight for her life. She was hungry, thirsty, but more importantly, she chose to stay mentally strong, refusing to lose hope. At times, when she focused entirely on survival, Jeanne no longer felt the pain of her body, and she fought with all her strength to make it through each day. The most striking aspect of Jeanne's survival battle was not just her physical strength but the deep connection to her mental and emotional resilience. Her survival instinct came from a much deeper place, from the darkest corners of her spirit. Even in the weakest moments of her mind and body, there was always a light, a flicker of hope. Every second became like a rebirth for her. Breathing, taking a step, each act of staying alive reminded her of the meaning of life, and each new day, each passing second was an opportunity for a fresh start. Her greatest trial was not only the fight for survival, but also the battle to preserve her mental endurance. Trapped in pain, Jean relied not only on her body to survive, but also on her mind. Her thoughts constantly reminded her to keep fighting, to push through. When despair took hold, Jean somehow managed to regroup mentally. Those moments were not just tests for her. They were times when she discovered how powerful her spirit truly was. The thoughts in her mind, combined with her body, made her stronger in this battle. Each day under the rubble transformed Jean. For 27 days, as her physical body weakened, her spirit grew incredibly strong. She became not only a woman who survived a disaster, but a symbol of how adversity and fear could empower the human spirit. Jeanne surpassed the limits of her body, discovered her warrior soul, and learned that survival is not only a physical process, but a spiritual one. Ultimately, Jean's rescue symbolized not only the strength of the body, but also the survival power of the mind. Throughout her 27-day struggle, Jean demonstrated to the world that even in the darkest of moments, a person can find strength within and must never lose hope. Every second of her journey was a lesson. Every step she took, a beacon of hope. Jeanne's warrior spirit revealed the power of human will, resilience, and determination in everyone. Her fight for survival wasn't just a physical effort, it was a reflection of the power of the human spirit. Jeanne's rescue resonated globally, inspiring many people. However, as soon as she was rescued, the challenges of survival were far from over. While being freed from the rubble physically brought her back to life, the real fight had only just begun. Jean's long recovery process, both physically and psychologically, became one of the greatest challenges of her life. Yet, her warrior spirit, which had guided her through the fight for survival, continued to lead her through this phase as well. Her recovery began with immense difficulty. Her body, weakened by hunger, dehydration, and exhaustion, was in a critical state. However, she soon realized that in order to truly recover, her mental health needed to heal as well. The mental trauma from the 27 days trapped under the rubble, filled with fear and isolation, had a deep impact on her. Yet, Jean was determined to overcome these obstacles and hold on to life. Healing mentally became even more important than physical recovery. Jean's journey to reconnect with life, rediscover her inner strength, and be reborn spiritually was a process of profound transformation. Rebuilding Jean as a person took time after her rescue. The treatment process required both physical and psychological support. Many times, memories of the terrifying moments under the rubble and the marks of her past brought her to the brink of despair. But somehow, Jean overcame every hardship. Every step of her recovery reminded her of the value of life. As her body, gradually healed, so too did her spirit. But her greatest triumph was not in physical healing. It was in her inner recovery. As her confidence grew, her body began to regain its former strength. While Jeanne rebuilt her life, she also witnessed Haiti's other disasters. Despite this, her personal struggle became an example to others. Haiti had suffered through great calamities, and Jeanne's 27-day ordeal gave not just her, but the entire nation hope. She did more than survive. She showed people the strength of determination, perseverance, and love. As people listened to her story, they realized the truth behind her becoming a symbol. Even in the darkest of times, one can find their inner strength and never give up. Over time, Jeanne became a hero to the people. Her story inspired many, both in Haiti and worldwide. Many began to reflect her survival spirit in their own lives. Jeanne's struggle not only surpassed physical limits, but also highlighted the immense significance of spiritual strength. She proved that the human spirit could find light in the darkest of times, and that the power of survival was connected not just to the body, but to the mind as well. Jeanne, once trapped under the rubble, alone and hopeless in the dark, had found the light. Slowly, she transformed her story into one of healing and hope. She rose again after other disasters, and not only survived, but began to embrace each day she lived. People began to reflect her experience in their own lives, looking at their struggles, challenges, and pains through a different lens. Jeanne's life gradually became a symbol of hope for the people of Haiti. Her struggle for survival was not just the story of one woman, it was a reflection of the entire nation's fight to stand again. Everyone learned that, in the midst of hardships, there is strength to be found, and as long as one holds on to hope, life can begin anew. As Jeanne healed physically, she contributed to the healing of her people. Her life demonstrated how, after such immense destruction, one could still find hope and the strength to start over. The impact of Jeanne's story went far beyond Haiti. People from all over the world were captivated by her resilience and survival power. The media's attention turned Jeanne into an international figure, but she always emphasized that the attention she received was not for her sake, but for the sake of humanity's strength. She continually highlighted that survival is not just the struggle of one individual, but the collective fight of all those who face adversity and fight for their lives. Over time, Jeanne became a guide for the communities in Haiti. She didn't just offer material aid to those trying to rebuild their lives after the disaster. She also provided spiritual support and inspiration. Jeanne's identity as a hero stemmed not only from her inner strength, but also from the help and encouragement she gave to others. She understood that disasters shape people not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually, which is why, by helping others, she was also healing her own wounds. Her determination to keep living transformed from the struggle of a woman trapped under rubble into a lesson offered to all of humanity. For Jeanne, the power of survival was just the beginning. She embraced each day as a gift, continuously proving to the world how strong one can be and how dark times can be illuminated. Jeanne's story became a symbol not just of Haiti's resilience, but of the strength, power, and hope of all humanity.